have a lot of questions for you, but let's
Great.
start there.
So about me, well, I'm a mom of two little girls. I like to always say that first because that's just so overwhelmingly meaningful to me in my life. Professionally speaking, I'm an eating disorder therapist, and I run an eating disorder recovery center and a women's wellness center. But I've been practicing for over 15 years, and the center is almost 9 years old. And the center came to me because of being in private practice for years, working with people affected by eating disorders. I just felt like there were so many gaps in services, and really wanted to create comprehensive care for those who were on the spectrum of suffering with eating disorders and disordered eating. I had suffered with an eating disorder for so much of my life. And I just felt like when I was going through the process, I could never get the help that I needed. I could never find professionals that understood what I was going through, even though they claimed that they were experts in the field in this particular area. And I often left feeling deeply misunderstood, and really frightened at times that this was sort of going to be the fate of my existence. And so the essence of my wellness was really about wanting to be the therapist that I would have really wanted when I was suffering. And so the center is really representative of the very individual needs that I think each and every person affected by an eating disorder and mental health really require when it comes to their own personal journey of recovery. And so much eating disorder treatment that's available to us is really sort of cookie cutter, and it doesn't necessarily acknowledge the individual nature of a person suffering or their individual life circumstances. And for me, those are at the core of why eating disorder behavior actually occurs. So I always found it very peculiar that treatment didn't address that individuality. And so the center really functions from a place of wanting to honor the unique needs of each and every person, and really explore recovery in an open and human and sometimes very unconventional way to really help people move away from the rules and rituals and feel a sense of freedom that I really believe that people can achieve when it comes to recovery.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I don't know if you heard when it was cutting out, but one of the founders suffers with obsessive compulsive disorder, and I also do as well. And very similar story, like there's very few specialists in that area. And then when you find them, it's kind of like they don't always necessarily get it. Obviously, there are a number of specialists that I have now come across, but it took a very long time. And it was quite scary when I finally had a name for what I was going through, to then be faced with a healthcare system that really wasn't equipped to deal with it. And when you're already in that place of confusion and being scared and ready to finally get help and being faced with that, it's a terrible feeling, which is also why, I got into the work that I'm doing. But I will say, with the work that we do at Made of Millions, eating disorders is something that doesn't come up a lot. And, and so I'm really excited to explore deeper into that today.
Great.
And really just learn more about it. I guess I imagine that there's a spectrum.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I guess if you could tell us a little bit about how it manifests, what does it look like? And we'll
I mean, I think when people think about eating disorders, they probably think about things like anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder or orthorexia, these big categorical and important, obviously, descriptions of the ways in which people suffer. And though they're absolutely relevant, when I think about eating disorders, I don't necessarily think about them in that way, because so often what I've come to learn and what I know is that people with eating disorders don't nicely fit into those categories. Some people do, but most people don't. Or at least over the journey of suffering with an eating disorder, there's a strong movement vacillating between those various disorders. And so people often find themselves not doing the eating disorder right, or even being further isolated because they don't fit into those boxes nicely, so to speak. And so
Right.
when I think about eating disorders, I actually think more about the ideas of binging, purging, and restricting with food, with our body, with life, because I do feel that when you're affected by an eating disorder or disordered eating, you move through those symptoms in very, very different ways. Sometimes you might have a primary symptom for a certain amount of time, and then eventually that symptom could swap. Other people are engaging in all of those symptoms all of the time. Some people have, series of certain symptoms, and then they swap into other ones. And so for me, when I think about it in this way, it feels like a more inclusive way to talk about eating disorders. And it's less alienating for those who don't categorically align.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what would you say is like is there an underlying theme or something underlying that's going on? Like I know with obsessive compulsive disorder, a lot of times we'll say that the underlying theme is ultimately being uncomfortable with uncertainty, which a lot of people are, but really to an extreme that it starts to interrupt their daily life and they do a series of compulsions or rituals to kind of minimize that uncertainty or at least minimize the anxiety that causes the uncertainty. Would you
Yeah,
say that there is?
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think certainly there is. I mean, I think some of the very common threads are just really low self-concept, feeling really inadequate, feeling really insecure, um, being perfectionistic. I think potentially having experienced trauma or loss. I think often there's an element of being quite sensitive, quite
Hmm.
capable, and high achieving. I think that a lot of people, when they think about eating disorder behavior, they think about that particular like golden nugget thing that happened in their life that then
Right.
resulted in the eating disorder. And it just doesn't work like that. I think
Yeah.
sometimes people are constitutionally, really built on being highly driven, high achieving, perfectionistic, and that can really turn into eating disorder behavior. Sometimes it can be situational, but I think those are some of the common themes. And like you said too, even with obsessive compulsive, this idea of control or
Yeah.
anxiety or depression. I mean, eating disorders they're often so concurrent with other mental health issues as well. So
Hmm.
I think sometimes that tends to even be the swap too. Binging on the eating disorder maybe like compensates by restricting the anxiety a little bit. So often when we
Hmm.
treat people, we recognize that all of these pieces might be evident, and as we move away from the eating disorder symptoms, then we can start to see what actually is primary. Maybe it is the eating disorder, but maybe it's other mental health issues or
Yeah.
developmental issues or anything else.
Right. And then obviously with eating disorders, I mean, with society in general and pressures on image and a lot recently on nutrition and all of these things, I imagine that again, there's a spectrum and people might be where it's not an issue yet and might be much further along. I guess typically what are the symptoms? What starts to happen? How does it start to manifest? And how do you know when it's a problem that
Mm-hmm.
you should be seeking help?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think probably how it usually starts for most is quite innocently.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to try to be healthier, be more active, or test out a certain aspect of dieting. Maybe you start to lose a little bit of weight, let's say, as an example. That's not the only way that eating disorders occur, but certainly that can happen. And then you get a lot of feedback from people around you about how positive that is. So I think it can actually be quite an innocent step into wanting to change or control some element of food in the body.
Hmm.
Or alternatively, if something is happening to you emotionally, it could be maybe that you soothed yourself with food through that
Right.
experience. Or maybe you rid yourself of the food through that experience, through vomiting or exercise or whatever that may be in terms of purge. Um, and so this idea that you maybe had quite an innocent experience that then starts to feel important and starts to feel necessary and starts to grow and change and develop more rules and more rituals and more particularities. And eventually your life becomes overwhelmed by it, more consumed by it. suddenly the things that you were once interested in actually can't get on top of that eating disorder symptom. Instead of going to your basketball practice after school, you're coming home and you're binging. And I think there are different ways that this starts to escalate for people all the time. And then what I would say to your question about how do you know when it's a problem, I think when people start to realize that their life has become so consumed by their rules and rituals, that's usually when they tune into the fact that this is bigger than them. This was not the intention, but this is bigger than them. That and or getting caught, or people recognizing changes in you physically and making comments about that. Even potentially having some quite severe physical ramifications. So I think people come to know that this is real when they start to realize that their life is very small and they don't feel well and they don't like who they are and they're not enjoying life and they feel like they can't change it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I remember hearing a lot more about eating disorders when I was younger, like in high school, and just in terms of around me, like you'd hear people suffering with it, or you might think someone is, like, wonder if somebody is suffering with it. I don't hear it so much anymore. Is it because it typically starts to manifest? Like, is there an age period where it usually shows up, or is it's again very much like can affect anybody?
Yeah, I think it can affect anybody. I think it sort of, I think it has a rap for being, particularly anorexia. It has a rap for being, a teenage, a young girl or a teenage girl's illness. And I actually don't think that's true at all. I mean, I think more than ever, especially now, eating disorders are so widespread and they don't discriminate. Regardless of age, gender, race, socioeconomic status, nobody is exempt from developing an eating disorder. And so I think, sometimes it can be when you're an adolescent moving through puberty and your body is changing. I think that's why there's a lot of talk about that being a very concentrated area of people developing eating disorders. But I feel like, we move through so many different life circumstances. We experience loss and pain and trauma and grief and all kinds of different things that happen over the course of our lifetime. And food is a very viable option to cope or not. And the one thing that we really all have, and really sort of the sole thing that we all have that is ours, is our body. So it acts as this convenient way to explore those feelings or numb them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you see it coming up more often now because, again, of how our society
Social
is
media.
going? Yeah, with Instagram and all of that. I mean, I have a niece that's just turned 13, and I worry about her because they're all like on these TikTok videos and like, starting to care about what they look like, and she's absolutely beautiful, but she has made a comment before about her body, and it's such an early age to be thinking that way.
I mean, there's no question that social media is an influencer in the way that we feel about us. So if having a low self-concept can be preemptively a trigger for developing an eating disorder, then yes, I think we're people are more at risk. But everybody looks at social media. Everybody is inundated with social media, and not everybody has eating disorders or disordered eating. So I think that depending on how you feel about yourself, the circumstances in your life, when you absorb social media, it will kick in different ways, in terms of affecting your sense of self and maybe what you want to do about that. But I think, yes, certainly there's a much more attuned focus on who you are and how you look and what image you're putting out into the world. And I think that is a lot of pressure. It's a lot of anxiety. And it's a lot of exposure. People don't have that sense of privacy that I think as human beings we deeply require in order to feel safe and sound and self-accepting. So I think those pieces can lead to that for sure.
Yeah. I know when I was first diagnosed with OCD, I went on a medication, and that medication kind of woke up this like hunger in me. Like it was like I think there's something called the satiable gland or something.
Okay.
And I just would eat food, and then I was like, I could eat another plate of food. And anyhow, over a period of time, without realizing, I had put on quite a bit of weight. And there was a short period of time when that became like I was very aware. I would be looking in the mirror all the time. I'd be weighing myself, and I could see myself almost, it became a theme for an obsession for me.
Like
And
that
my
the OCD
behavior,
stuff was swapping into that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And my behaviors didn't change around eating. It was more just I was like obsessed with how much did I weigh? What did I eat today? Like going through it in my head. And I eventually, with exercise and stuff, I kind of got back to where I was, but I could see that how easy, like you said, how easy it is to slip into that
Mhm.
without even really realizing, but then getting to a point where I was like, I feel kind of gross because it's like consuming me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people believe that eating disorders are about food and that they're about the body. And of course, eating disorders show up in food in the body. So that absolutely has to be addressed. But what really goes on for a person when they have an eating disorder is that incessant and pervasive noise in their
Yeah.
mind. And just like what you're describing, just the ways in which you have to follow these rules and rituals, that fundamentally is the eating disorder, that your brain is so busy, it's so preoccupied, it feels so intruded upon, and it shows itself in food in the body. But the work and the ongoing repair is with the mind, which is
Hmm.
why it's such a pervasive mental health issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes over your life in the sense that that's all that you're thinking about. I mean,
Hmm.
I was starting to ask like some of my siblings, like, do I look like, like getting reassurance, trying to get
Right.
reassurance from them and never being satisfied with the answer that they gave me.
Sure.
Um,
And
and
that's part of
so
how the eating disorder wins. So I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
no, it's just it reminds me a lot of OCD, like in terms of instead of like the compulsive behaviors that like it's
Hmm.
the something like you get an intrusive thought or whatever it is, and then you have to do something to listen to that intrusive thought.
I
So
think in
it's
some ways they're very parallel. I think the
yeah,
rituals that a person has to follow when it comes to food in their body very much echo those same rituals that somebody affected by OCD would also have to follow.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I
yeah.
had never really looked at it like that. And then I know there's so many misconceptions.
Hmm.
I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you've touched on that, it can affect anybody, but what are the common misconceptions out there?
Um, I think the thing that I said about food and body, that's not actually about that.
Yeah,
I think the other piece around the fact that you'll never get well, you'll be sick forever, that's one that I really like to bust down a little bit because I feel like that's really not a hopeful message. And I
yeah,
think if we have to believe that we'll be struggling forever, that can be very challenging to even make inroads into wanting to be even more well or even in recovery.
yeah,
So I think that's a misconception. Um,
yeah,
I also think that it's a misconception that someone could maybe decide to step into recovery and that it would be over quickly. I think the work of healing an eating disorder is tremendous. And I
yeah,
think it's tremendous in terms of the time that it takes, and the focus and the sacrifice that it takes in order to be well again. And often I find people, not necessarily the person directly affected by the eating disorder, but often loved ones, that's very challenging for them to understand. Like they've been going to treatment for 4 weeks. Why is this not better? I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what it actually means to be in recovery too. Like, what is recovery? And there's some differences that I think are really fundamental, which is that when people are affected by eating disorders, they're not able to have abstinence from their symptom. You have to engage with food all the time, all throughout each and every day. So you can't just not use alcohol or not use drugs and live. And that's not to underestimate the fact that drug or alcohol use and recovery is so deeply complicated in and of itself as well. But it just is another layer of the challenge of recovery, because you essentially have to relearn how to be with the
Yeah.
thing that is harming you. And so what that means as well is that recovery is loaded with having symptoms.
Yeah.
And that can be very defeating for people. And it can feel like they're moving circularly through this process and they're not maybe getting to where they need to go. So I think there's a lot of unrealistic expectations about what this looks like. And I think that, recovery is about recognizing that symptoms are going to change. They're going to be different. They maybe won't be as often. They maybe won't be as intense. The feelings that you have about yourself or your body, all of this stuff is progressively going to change, but it's not going to happen quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do want to talk about, therapy. And I know that you mentioned that your approach sometimes can be a bit unconventional. But I also just wanted to touch on, sometimes I know at least I've experienced like when I felt, depressed before, when I've talked about my OCD, like some people have like this image of what somebody would look like that
Mm-hmm.
has a certain mental health. I imagine, especially with eating disorders, like if you look like you're, a certain way, then why would you be so consumed with what you look like when you clearly are a beautiful human? I mean, everyone's beautiful, but like,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what I'm trying to say? I
Yeah.
mean, does that come up a lot, or is
Oh,
that
yeah. I
kind of
mean,
an, yeah,
yeah, I think most people with eating disorders look like every normal person walking around
right,
the world. And I think that's part of the reason why so many people suffer in silence, because they don't feel like they fit the bill, or because physically, you wouldn't necessarily know, but yet the intrusiveness of their symptoms are deadly. And so I think that's a massive misconception. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the way that you look does not dictate the severity of your suffering. In fact,
yeah,
sometimes I think it's actually not at all something that we see on people.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So what they see in the mirror is it doesn't matter. It's just it's a mental. It's what's happening to their brain, really.
Well, it's about what they see in the mirror, but also like
Yeah,
the fact that they can fly under the radar because a lot of people look really normal and really healthy,
yeah,
right? So to come forward and acknowledge that you might be suffering, people would maybe a lot of people have shared with me over the years, like people don't even believe them. They don't even understand it, right? So
yeah,
there's that piece, and then there's also that piece for the person who's directly suffering, that really dysmorphic way that they see themselves, right?
yeah,
So dysmorphia is looking at yourself and not being able to comprehend and see what actually is real. And that's a huge component of
yeah.
having an eating disorder.
Yeah, and I think, one of the main, I guess with obsessive compulsive disorder with some intrusive thoughts, they can seem so irrational, but you believe them so much. But when it comes to, how you're looking at yourself, it's like a real thing. You know what I mean? Like it's
Mhm.
tangible. It's not like a thought that was totally kind of far out, far reaching.
Oh
So I
yeah.
can see how it's easy to latch on to that.
Yeah.
Um,
It becomes
yeah.
like your moral code. It's like the way that you know that you are, that you have to live. Like
Yeah,
there's really very little that can disrupt that.
yeah.
Hmm.
We're in the middle of No One Told Me campaign right now.
I
And
love it.
yeah, and
I just
it's
love it.
we've had such a great reaction to it, and we're actually doing it for the month of May. So if you want to get involved in any way, let
I
me know.
I would
But
love to.
yeah, but I guess what is something, I'm sure you have a lot of statements. No one told me
I don't know,
X,
because it's
but
funny that you're asking me this. When I was looking at Instagram, I was seeing all these like beautiful swirls of all these things
yeah.
that everybody was saying. I was like, what did no one tell me? Like, what would I
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, I mean I haven't done mine yet. I have to reflect on it.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I won't put you on the spot then. But I like, does it sometimes manifest with a thought process, or where you have this, because I know, again, like I'm coming back to my own personal experience, with myself, it's very much intrusive thoughts that I experience, and I've I've believed and trusted my internal world for so long, and it's never steered me astray. So when I started to have these thoughts, I needed to figure out what they meant, and then that's when I came into the loop. Um,
Mhm.
can eating disorders start off with that negative dialogue about yourself, or is that one way it could manifest?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think that eating disorders are built deeply in us. Like, I think they're built in the way that we experience the world. They're built in the way that we understand relationships. As you were talking, I was thinking, a fundamental belief system that I had when I
Yeah,
was growing up was that love equaled harm. And that was because I came from a deeply loving family, a deeply supportive family, but at the same time, it was harmful, it was unpredictable, it was violent, but it was
right.
so loving.
Yeah,
And it was so confusing. And so one of the things that I really learned in the world was like that love and harm exist. And I was doing that with my body. I kind of loved it and also was
yeah,
hurting it all the time. And I would attract relationships that did the same thing. Oh, I love this person and they harm me. And so I feel
yeah,
like the ways in which we understand the world, the deeper meanings of how we experience relationships and people and who we are, I think that fundamentally is what then plays out with food in the body. It was easier
yeah.
for me to play out love and harm with food in my body because I was the
Mhm.
one running that show.
Right.
I wasn't aligning with another person who was going to do that to me. I could totally do that on my own. And I think that's why it felt convenient for me. So I feel like eating disorder behaviors are rooted deeply in us, like how we
Yeah.
understand ourselves and our worth, who we're supposed to be on the planet, and then how the body and food can essentially play that out for us in a way that feels like it's ours.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think for me, I really had to look deep at what my core beliefs are, like, and kind of change some of those core beliefs because they weren't helping me, and it was kind of hurting me and how I was, and some of the behaviors and stuff. So, but to figure out what those core beliefs are that are hurting you are sometimes challenging
Very.
to find,
Yeah.
right? Um, and we don't know why we develop them other than just experience and sensitivity level. Like I'm a
Hmm.
highly sensitive person. And so,
Hmm.
there's all these things that we would have done at a younger age to kind of create this shelter and this belief system that we created from that's ingrained in us,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
it's really interesting.
yeah, I think to your point, it's been really interesting being a mom. I have two young girls, 3.5 and 5, and they're from me and my partner. We've done all the same things, but they are so fundamentally different.
Right.
Their constitution, their level of emotional capacity, self-awareness, sensitivity. Like you can see just who we are as people. We're built in so differently. So that the way that my 5-year-old is so deeply sensitive, it's like a beautiful thing about her. And I'm often aware of how that potentially could be harmful for her when she walks out into the world, despite the fact that it's so beautiful. My younger
Yeah.
one's got a lot more, she wears a bit more armor. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that who we are really dictates how we enter into the world. And I think that makes us vulnerable or not to all kinds of things.
Yeah, I read your post today going off a bit about your daughter and
Mm,
how she came into your room. I used to do that as a kid. And so when I read your post, it was like because I never knew how to express my feelings when I was a kid, just exactly how you referenced that.
yeah.
And I kind of thought, oh, that must have been a behavior because I need it because we had a family of 5 kids, right?
Wow.
So my family was chaos. I don't really remember my parents too much. I remember my siblings and us playing together. So so I really resonated with your post just from when I
Oh,
was a
thank
kid.
you. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think we don't understand, we play out all these kinds of behaviors and we do it as kids and then we do it as we grow. I think eating disorder behavior is just an extension of that, or obsessive compulsive behavior is an
yeah,
extension of that. We have to show what we feel in some way,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so if we don't have the words for it or the audience, then
yeah,
we're going to put it out behaviorally.
yeah. So, is there a gold standard for therapy for eating disorders? If so, what is that, or how does your your center approach. And I will say a lot of our audience, so we'll be saving this onto our website after, so a lot of people will come across it by doing Google searches.
Oh,
And
great.
we do have a large US audience as well.
Great.
So just to let you know about that.
So gold standard. So here, I don't know anything about a gold standard. I think what I really aim to do is to help people feel safe enough. We all here at the center help people to feel safe enough to be able to share their truths or move into their most honest self in ways that they haven't been able to before. I really believe in holistic care. I don't think eating disorders can be resolved just through talk therapy. I don't
Yeah.
think eating disorders can be resolved just through having a meal plan given to you. I don't think eating disorders can be resolved, if you stabilize your weight. I think all of it has to happen together. And I think it's really important, I guess if I think about maybe gold standard, I think about people who are working quite cohesively in a circle of care so that the person who is trying to move through their wellness feels really safe and feels that the information is really clear and there's a lot of transparency. When I think about eating disorder recovery, and eating disorders in general, what I should say is, they're sneaky and they're manipulative. And we sort of, and I come by this honestly, and I say this because I used to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
I was a big liar. I lied about everything. I was sneaky all the time. And so one of the things that I think is really, really critical when it comes to wellness is being in a place in your recovery where you will get caught, where you will be seen, so that you can actually stop being manipulative and aligning with the eating disorder. I think that's really fundamental. So one of the things that I think the center really offers is this opportunity where everybody is on the same team, everybody is working with the same intention, and so you can't hide out. And I think all of those pieces of wellness, every aspect of a person's mental health, physical health, nutritional health needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Even things that seem quite benign, like, oh, I'm not really sleeping well. Well, if you don't sleep well, then it activates anxiety. And if you feel anxious, then you might eat on that. And that's a
Yeah.
binge symptom. And then you're going to, like, it just, right?
Yeah. Now that we're in this time period that we are with COVID, and I imagine you're offering still a lot of like your therapy digitally and stuff, right?
Yeah, the center's fully operating virtually.
Yeah. So do you see like a potential opportunity to do that in the future, like with more, like I guess going outside of Canada, like
Yeah, I
because
mean, it's necessary.
I think ultimately, like people are trying to find the right place to get help, right? I know that
Mhm.
for OCD as well, for eating disorders, and so for the community out there, like, do you see that going in that direction?
So we work with people all over the world. Some
Okay.
even though we're outpatient, and that's intentional because I really want people to experience life while they're in recovery because it's life that triggers recovery. Obviously, that depends on the stage of wellness that a person is at. If they're capable enough to not be in a residential treatment space, but people travel to Toronto all the time to work with us. And so that's always been a viable option. And then as well, even clients that we may be currently working with, they might go travel or go to university. And so virtual work has always been
Okay.
part of how we operate. And of course, it's exponentially changed even now because it's what we
Hmm.
do. And we do it in all different capacities. So all of our group work runs via Zoom, all of the individual work through every single practitioner. So even our embodiment work, which might even be movement work or different kinds of creative work, that's still even operating. It just operates in a person's space. So we've been able with this pandemic to really figure out new and different ways to service people all over the place,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I feel really lucky about.
Yeah. And I guess with that, with therapy and doing it virtually, is there a family member that you often have kind of like helping hold the person accountable? Especially because you said there is lying and manipulation, obviously, because they're just trying to feel safe or they're trying to you know, relieve the anxiety or whatever it is that's coming up for them. So because you're not there with them, they're not in your center physically, is that, I can imagine that might be challenging, but
Yeah,
on both ends.
yeah, I mean, I really feel fundamentally like wellness really happens when we have like an army around us of protection. So it's really an important facet of, I think, people's recovery and our work with them, that we incorporate family therapy or couple therapy or whatever else it would be with the people who are that person's loved ones. Because even though those people may not have an active eating disorder in terms of food and body symptoms, they're on the roller coaster with the person who's suffering, and often enabling, often completely unaware. And
Yeah.
so when we work with people at the center, it is a huge portion of the work that we do. And I recognize that some clients are not ready for that right off the bat, which we talk about, but
Yeah.
certainly, you know, family involvement, loved ones involvement, I think, changes the trajectory of a person's recovery fundamentally.
Yeah. And for people out there that might be, you know, we have a big, massive online platform because we truly believe there's a lot of power in storytelling. And when people are first starting to experience symptoms for, you know, certain mental health disorders, they often will type it into Google, right? Especially when there's shame involved and they don't want to
Hmm.
admit to it. They don't want to talk to anybody about it. They're too afraid to bring it up to anybody. And so they come across, you know, our site, hopefully, and come across an article that they can really resonate with. Um, what was my question?
Googling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What would you say as an initial step when someone's realizing like this might be an issue for them, and they're not ready yet to come to your center, or
Hmm.
they're not ready, or they may not, they can't, maybe can't afford right now to get
Hmm.
the help that they need? What would you say is like a first step?
Um, I think a first step, um, if you could, would be to tell somebody.
Yeah.
Um, you don't have to tell the whole story, but maybe just tell somebody what you're going through. I think that is a tremendously, I mean, and also I don't undermine the fact that that's a massive first step.
Yeah.
But if there's a space to tell, I would say please tell. Maybe you write it down, maybe you say it verbally, but I think when there's this, I think this unbelievable experience that happens for people when they tell truths, there's like a
Yeah.
freedom and there's an openness. And I also think that then you can receive the way that people care about you and support you. And so that I feel like is a beautiful opportunity in just moving into wellness. That would be maybe a first step. And then maybe in terms of something practically speaking, I wonder what would happen if, you know, most people who are affected by eating disorders and disordered eating have, you know, a limitless amount of rules and rituals that they have to follow. And one of the things that maybe you want to try is what would happen if you challenged one of those things just on your own,
Yeah.
just one of those things every single day until it maybe didn't feel like a big deal, or
Yeah.
as big of a deal. Those might be some inroads into some of the ways that you can test your own abilities and move into some wellness.
Yeah. Someone's just asked, can you guide me to resources? So do you have, you know, are there any resources online that you refer clients to, or any books or anything? Um,
Yeah,
do,
I mean, so I'm thinking of some really important books that I think are valuable are Life Without Ed. Jenny Schaefer's book, Life Without Ed, I think is like a really um, nice way to really see the eating disorder personified. I think it's also a helpful book if you love someone with an eating disorder to really see the intrusiveness of an eating disorder. I really
yeah.
love Anita Johnson's book, Eating by the Light of the Moon. I'm interested in stories and I'm interested in the ways that our environment affects us. And she's a beautiful writer and writes poetry and mythology and all different kinds of interesting ways that metaphorically you can understand the eating disorder.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so much of our struggle is rooted in our um, in our family life, in our history. And so I think really anything about attachment and to our parents, I think is very valuable. And even there's a book called Father Hunger, which I think is a beautiful illustration of what it means to not have such a strong bond in that relationship and the implications of that.
Yeah.
So those are
Yeah.
some to think of.
Okay. Awesome. I
Yeah,
might grab those from you after and just put them in the
sure,
posting. Yeah.
sure.
Um, so, for you yourself, having gone through this yourself, I imagine that that can be quite helpful with your clients as well, because you can really understand you've been there before. What was your kind of big aha moment during your own recovery, if you can think of something that really kind of changed the trajectory of your recovery?
Um, I think that there was so much denial for so long, in particular when I was quite acutely unwell. I think that's sort of the nature of the eating disorder, that the more you get into it, the more you don't even know you're in it. And so I had a lot of physical implications, and I was really suffering, actually, physiologically, a lot. And I ended up having this very scary experience in the car with my mom, where my body was just shutting down. And I knew in that moment that I was likely, or I could die. It became very real to me. And this was a very extreme moment, but it shifted my thinking, in that I knew in that moment that this was bigger than I was.
Yeah.
And I had really underestimated that. And I was with my mother at the time, and I looked at her and could see that she was just so afraid. And then suddenly I saw that this was also about her. So,
Yeah.
that tunnel vision that I was experiencing in this illness, it suddenly dawned on me that everything I knew was affected by this. And that really
Yeah.
changed my want to be well. It was just not
Yeah.
just about me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so important because unfortunately, we often hear, that a lot of people hit rock bottom
Mhm.
before they take it seriously. And I don't know what the solution is to that. And I don't know if it's necessary, but what would you say to that? Like, do you see a lot of people that have come to that extreme, and what can we do to kind of intervene before it gets to that point? Because it is a very much like with any recovery, that person has to be ready in order to really show up,
Totally.
right? It can't be family members.
Pushing. Yeah, I wish I had the answer to that, and I wish I knew how to change that. It's something that I contemplate so often, and I think that though we can be helpful in trying to push people to make connection and do the things that they need to do to want wellness, um, it really does have to come from that person.
Yeah.
In order to have longevity, otherwise I feel like recovery is temporary and people have regression. And so I think it is a hard thing. I think rock bottom is a real thing. I mean, I see it every day, and I see it differently for each person. And I think we all have to come to a place where there's a want. But I will say that, I'm not sure if we're ever ready.
Yeah.
Like, I think that for most people, and and even for myself, like, I think I wanted to be well. I think I wanted to be free. Like, those were very real feelings. I was so desperate. But yet, when I actually really thought about that and giving up all the rules and rituals, I didn't want to do any of that as
Yeah.
well. So people will say to me, like, I'm ready, but I'm not really ready. And I thought I was ready, but like I'm not ready anymore. And I
Yeah.
actually think that that's really normal. So I'm not sure we have to be so ready. I just think we need to also really make the strong, safe connections with people who are going to support us in it. I think that changes things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's different for each and every person, but I
Yeah.
do think that someone has to come to it on their own in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for myself, it was a rock bottom situation just because I didn't know how to express it, or I had too much shame. So
Mhm.
I think for me, I think with a lot more of the advocacy that's happening out there, and hopefully people are becoming more comfortable to come forward with what they're going through. Because for me, I just didn't know how to articulate it. And the ways I was kind of saying it to some of my siblings, I wasn't saying it to the point where I really needed help
Hmm.
until that night where I was crying and I was like, I need help. And I sounded desperate.
Hmm.
So for me, it was like, yeah, just having that shame behind it.
Hmm. Such a good point.
Yeah. And then, you said again, like recovery is possible. And
Hmm.
so, which is great to hear. And for those that are suffering, obviously to put in all of that hard work, and it's hard work from day one, and then
Hmm.
even when you're managing it, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I guess, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Like
Sure.
what do you see, and is it possible, and
Hmm.
is relapse a thing, and
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I do think recovery is possible. I think that it is really possible to have a peaceful relationship with food in your body and to no longer engage with binging, purging, and restricting. Do I think that people may continue out some of those patterns of binging, purging, and restricting in their life and their relationships? These are all the things that we teach people when they work with us at the center. Yes. And then could that lead back to the food stuff? Sure. But I think that once we have more stability with food in our body, then I actually think people just really start to see that the eating disorder is built out of their life and out of their life experiences and out of their relationships and the different ways that they have to engage with the world. So that may be the ongoing work, but I believe within that we can be very free from food in the body. But the piece about relapse or having symptoms,
Yeah.
yeah, like that's the part that I think is totally real when it comes to having an eating disorder. There can't be an expectation that you're going to decide to move into a process and not maybe have active symptoms. I think recovery is about moving through them quicker. I think recovery is about getting back on track in a quicker way. I think recovery is about feeling less shameful about that. I think it's about being gentler with yourself about the reality of that. So I think the the impression of recovery sometimes is like, oh, I'm this person. I suffer with so much with food in my body, and then I will no longer ever do that. And I'll love my body and I'll love everything and I'll be fine. But I actually
Yeah.
think we have to have really realistic ideas about recovery, which is that you're still a real person and you're going to face all the real challenging, interesting, beautiful, difficult things about life. The work is so that you then can do that, face that, and not take it out on food in the body. Um,
Yeah.
so it's not like you're getting,
Yeah.
that's sort of how I think about it.
Yeah, totally. Um, I know that they'll cut us off at the
Oh,
one hour point. We have about 10 more minutes.
10
I just
minutes.
want to see if there's some comments. I just want to make sure that we're not ignoring any questions.
Okay.
Um, uh, just more like thanks for sharing and things
Yep.
like that. Um, for people that are suffering in silence right now,
Hmm.
I guess what are some something that you would want to say to them? I know we talked about where to turn, obviously opening up to someone. I think that's massive, as hard
Hmm.
as that could be, but any words of hope for those individuals?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think what I would say is um, that it's okay and that you're not alone and that you deserve more and better
Mm,
and that you're worth it.
yeah, beautiful. I did want to talk about like COVID and, all
Sure,
of the stuff with that. So let's maybe just talk about that for a few minutes and then we'll
sure.
wrap it up. But right now, we're all at home. I mean, I know that my life revolves around eating, sleeping, working, and, exercising and taking my dog for walks. So food is
Hmm.
definitely up there, more so
Sure.
than usual because we have more time, I imagine. And I've seen a couple of your, um, I think I watched you on the morning show
Oh,
yesterday.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you touched on that a little bit, but yeah, just some thoughts on that and some tips on how to manage things a bit better when food is in it's very triggering right now for some people.
Yeah, and it's so prevalent because there's so little else to, as you said, be thinking
Yeah,
about. And so I think that it is high time for eating disorder behavior because I think our lives and our world has become very small and very insular. And so much of our day to day is broken up by eating. I mean, naturally, right?
yeah,
So I think that's probably one of the reasons why eating disorder behavior is really activated right now. And I think, you know, like how I would say, whether we were in a normal situation in the world or in a pandemic, I think it's really, really critical to be mindful of the ways in which you're structuring your day and structuring your relationship with food. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is that eating disorders aren't about food and they aren't about the body, but there's so many feelings that are happening for people right now because of the world, and there's
yeah,
so much that's unknown, and there's so little control that we all have. And all of that
yeah,
emotional stuff is at the root of why people play this stuff out with food, right? So I think it's high time to maybe want to do that. But if we are structuring our eating, if we are finding maybe unconventional ways to join for mealtime, whether you live alone or live with others, but similarly mimicking what you might do in your normal life, if you're not if you are more regulated in that way, or having meal support. We do that through the center too. Just meal accountability or some means of scheduling and regulation so that the whole day is just not this blurry, grazing, messy,
yeah,
chaotic piece. Like I think we need to wake up in the morning and like I had said yesterday on that show, just get out of your pajamas and get dressed and brush your
yeah,
teeth and sit down for breakfast and make your workspace different than your eating space and different than your sleeping space. I know like some people are in very small quarters, but like maybe this particular corner is for this and that particular corner is for that. I think that there's a need to have separation in the facets of our life because that's what I think leads people to just eating and eating or soothing with food or conversely restricting food, wanting to
yeah.
just like control something because nothing feels like ours right now.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, thank you for that.
Hmm.
Um, where can people find you? I'm sure we'll have some questions about that. I did post your Instagram handle there, so
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So at Kyla Fox Recovery, and then the center is Kyla Fox Centre, but it's Canadian. So it's
right.
CENTRE. And then the website is www.kylafoxcentre.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it was lovely chatting with you. I could
And you
honestly
too.
I could talk for much longer, but yeah, they
Thank
kick you off
you.
at the hour mark.
Thank you so much for having
Um,
me. It really means so much to me.
yeah, no, of course. And like I said, we'll get in touch and see if there's other ways we can collaborate. And we are always
I love
looking
that.
for stories. So if you have any, I don't know if you call them clients or members that, are interested in doing advocacy work, we'd love to. Sorry, my
Great.
phone just, yeah.
That's okay.
Okay,
It's
well,
about you.
have a great rest of your afternoon, and
Thank you so
yeah,
much,
we'll
you
chat soon.
too. Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
bye.
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 See you.